All right, guys, so we're back with part 3 of our Discord bot premiums command tutorial with Stripe, of course. So in the last video, we dedicated that whole video to setting up Nest.js, making sure the authentication works, making sure the connection to the database works, making sure that the passport was working properly, making sure that our routes were protected. So now that we've done all of that, the only thing that we have to do left is to connect the front end with the back end and making sure that we are sending authenticated requests as well as making sure that we are authenticated. So right now, let me go ahead and do this. So I'm on the front end right now. I'm currently not logged in, but I'm on the front end right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that whenever I click on this button, it's going to redirect us to that /API/auth/login route on the backend. And remember, that route is responsible for redirecting us to the Discord platform. So it takes us away from our platform to Discord. Discord is we're going to basically authorize, and when we authorize, it's going to redirect us back to our platform. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement that. It's very easy, a lot easier than you would expect. So we're going to go into the front end. We're going to go to that landing page. Like I said, this landing page, however you want to build it, it's up to you. But essentially, you just need a button or some link or something that you click on. And when you click on it, it literally redirects the user to the correct redirect page. So for example, let me go ahead and create a function called redirect to Discord, or let me call it login Discord. Actually, you know what? Let's call it redirect with Discord. Sorry, redirect to Discord. Redirect to Discord. Okay, and so whenever we click on this button, we're literally just going to go ahead and set the let's see, window.location.href. And we'll set this to the localhost port 3001/API/auth/login. We'll set it to that URL. So whenever I click on this button, it'll redirect to Discord. And watch what happens. So if I go ahead and click on this, you can see that it redirects me here. When I click authorize, it redirects me to that redirect URL. Okay, however, we want to make sure that it's redirecting back to the front end. So what we're going to do is in the redirect route in our API, it's right over here, we're just going to pretty much redirect the user. So what I'll do is I will get that response object, and we'll simply just go ahead and I'll do a console log redirecting user res.redirect, and we'll redirect it to the front end, and I'll redirect it to the dashboard. Okay, so watch what happens if I go ahead and click on login. We're going to click on authorize. This will redirect us to the dashboard. Okay, now how do we ensure on the front end that we are only showing routes to users that are authenticated? That's the next step. So we're going to focus on the front end now. So here's what we're going to do. Essentially what we want to do is we want to make an API call to that /status route. So over here, this is what tells us if we're authenticated or not. Okay, this /API/auth/status endpoint tells me if we're authenticated or not. If this endpoint returns a 401 or 403, that means that we are unauthenticated, okay, or unauthorized. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a function called get authenticated user. Okay, or actually I'll call this a get auth status. And this will literally just be an axios.get HTTP. And I'll hardcode the URL for now. We're going to call this, and we want to make sure we pass the with credentials parameters. That's true. We're also going to want to make sure we do that with every authenticated API call. Let me go ahead and create a variable called config. I'll type annotated to Axios request config, so you can get IntelliSense. So we'll pass that in right over here. Okay, so this will ensure that whenever we make the API call to the server, it's going to send our cookies, because we want to make sure we send the cookie from the front end to the back end, so the back end can actually get the correct cookie and deserialize the session. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to go ahead and use the React Context API. We're going to go ahead and fetch the user, and once we get the user from the endpoint, we're going to update that user we're gonna update that user context, so that way we can actually get that user context literally everywhere in our application. So a couple things that we have to do. First, let's go into utils. I'm gonna create a folder called contexts, and I'll just create a user context.tsx. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and import the create context function, and I'm gonna go ahead and create a variable called user context, and we're gonna create a context just like that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and pass in an empty object, but I'm gonna also create a type. So I'm gonna create a file called types.ts, and what I'll do is I'll create a type called user context type, because I want to type annotate the context or the create context function call, because it is generic. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, look, the context type is going to expect a user. Now that user can actually be undefined, because if the user is undefined, that means the user is unauthenticated. Okay, so we want to definitely ensure that the user can be defined or undefined. Now we're going to need a user type as well, so let's create that too. So that's literally just going to mimic whatever the user looks like on the backend as well. So we only have the ID. We're going to have the Discord ID. And we're going to have the email address. And we're also going to have premium, which is a Boolean. Okay. And the user context type will literally just have this user property that is a type of user. So now I can type annotate, or not type annotate, but specify the generic type of create context. So instead of just having it as a regular, context, we can type annotate that to a user context type. And you can see that if I specify the user property, I can definitely provide something there. But like I said, we're going to leave it alone because the user could be undefined. Okay. So here's what we're going to do next. What I'm going to do now is, and now you could use literally React query if you want to do your API calls. I'm not going to do that for now. I'm just going to handle this myself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder called hooks, and I'll create a hook called use I guess use auth user or use fetch user, I guess. We'll call it use fetch user. And this hook is going to be responsible for fetching the authenticated user. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called use fetch user. And it's not going to take in any parameters. It's going to have some state. That's because that's what really hooks are. They're just a function that has state. So we're going to go ahead and create a state variable. I'll call this loading. Set loading. Call use state. By default, we'll leave it as false. We're going to have a user object, set user. And we're going to go ahead and call use state. Okay. And I think we'll also have error as well. So if there's any error, we'll set that as well. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a, let's see. So when we call this use fetch user, what's going to happen is we're going to need to use the useEffect hook. Inside this useEffect hook, we're going to want to perform a side effect. That side effect is going to be making an API call to our API. And we're basically going to call that endpoint, that /auth/status endpoint. Now, earlier we created this get auth status function. So we're going to go ahead and just call that. Okay, it doesn't take in any parameters. And now what we can do is we can handle the promise by calling .then and calling .catch to handle any errors. Okay, so the endpoint, remember, returns the user object, so we can destructure data. For now, what I'll do is I'll console log that data just so you guys can see what it looks like on the front end. And we'll also specify an empty array for the dependency list. Okay. Because we are going to update state inside the useEffect hook. So we want to make sure that we provide an empty array. Otherwise, it's going to infinitely call the API. It's going to infinitely render, which is going to result in infinitely calling the API. And we don't want that. So let's go ahead and use this hook right now. So we'll call use fetch user. And let's see what happens on the front end. So if I go ahead and open this up, you're going to see that right now I have the cookie. Okay. In the console, you're going to see that we have a CORS issue. And yeah, so the reason why we're having this issue is because on the backend, we need to specify that, let's see, let's go over to main.ts. So we have the origin specified, but we need to also specify credentials set to true, and that should fix the error for us. So if I refresh the page, you can see that we have the user over here being logged, which is good. That's exactly what we want. We have Discord ID, email ID, premium set to false. Okay, we have the Discord ID over here, email ID, everything is good. Okay, so exactly what it is that we get from this endpoint is exactly what we're fetching on React. Okay, so now what do we want to do with this hook? Well, before we do anything else, let me go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and create a type, and I'll call this authenticated user response type. And essentially, really, this is just going to give me back the Discord ID, email ID, premium. Because what I want to do is I want to type annotate Axios. To be honest with you, I don't want to use the same type for that, because what I can do is right now, right, this data object, this is of type any. Okay, so if I try to reference properties, it's not going to give me IntelliSense, and it doesn't know what type it is. So we can do a couple things. We can cast the type of data, or we can specify the type, because we can specify the type for the generic get function. Because Axios.get is actually generic, so you can actually pass in literally whatever you want. Okay, now I don't want to use the same exact type for that, so instead what I'll do is I'll just call this authenticated user response type. I know it's a little bit tedious, but we'll just do that. Just because I don't want to use the same thing. Okay, so authenticated user response type. And now watch what happens if I hover over data. You're going to see that's the type. And if I were to reference data dots, you're going to see that that is what I get. Now, it might be worth actually, since these are the same, since those properties are the same, the user as well as the authenticated user response type are the same, there shouldn't be any problem if I just update user with data. That should be fine. And I can also type annotate use state to be user. And that should be fine as well, because those properties are exactly the same. Okay, so we're gonna update user by calling set user. Okay, and what we're gonna do is I'm gonna also add a finally. So this will just literally just set loading to false. So when we're done with the API call, we're gonna indicate that we're done by setting loading to false, and when we begin the API call, we should definitely set loading to true right over here. Cool. So now we want to make sure we are also I guess we can also set any errors too, if there are any. Okay, awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to return loading, or let's do user loading error. Okay, so what's going to happen is in the app.tsx file, we're going to call useFetchUser. Okay, we're going to get the loading, error, and user object. Okay, so you're going to see right over here that if I console log all three of these things, you're going to see what's going to happen is that there are going to be some re-renders. Let me refresh, or is it's loading, sorry, not loader. Okay, there's going to be some re-renders, but you can see that at first loading is false and user and error are undefined. Then we make the API call. So the loading status goes from false to true, but user and error are still undefined. And error is still undefined, but then we get the user back. Okay, and you can see that we set loading to false over here. So a couple of re-renders, which is good. Now what we want to do is we want to do a couple things. So let's say, for example, if the user is undefined, or if, let's say, we're still loading. Okay, so first let's handle the first case. So if there is an error, which basically, if there is an error, that means the user is unauthenticated. They're unauthorized. So whenever the API call makes a request, it's going to throw a 403 or 401, whatever status code the server returns. That will throw an error. So we should definitely handle that case. So if there is an error, we should return, for now we'll just say unauthorized or unauthenticated. We'll just say unauthorized. If loading, we'll return loading. And everything else, that'll be fine. All right, so let's just refresh the page real quick so we can see what happens. So if I refresh, you can see that there's this loading over here. It's hard to see it because it just happens so instantly. But if I actually let me usually set timeout real quick. So let's do that. Let's set it to 5 seconds. So now you can see that it's loading, and then it's going to display the actual dashboard. Okay, I'll do it to 1 second. I'll change it to 1 second. Okay, now watch this. If I actually, let me go into the application, and what I'll do is I'll delete this cookie. Okay, delete that cookie. If I go ahead and if I refresh, you're going to see that it says unauthorized, because remember, like I said, any 400 status code or any 500 status code, that's going to basically throw an error, or Axios will throw an error. Okay, any status code that is 400, 500, etc., that is returned from the server, Axios will use that as, the Axios will pretty much reject that. Okay, it'll basically reject that as a promise, which is good because then you can handle an error appropriately. Okay, now one more thing that we want to do is we want to also make sure that we are using the user context. So that way, anywhere in our application, we can actually reference the user itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually get rid of these fragments, and I'm going to wrap the whole switch with the user context provider. So we're going to import user context, and we're going to reference provider. We're going to wrap everything there. And for value, we're going to go ahead and do user is going to be user. Okay, so right now we're unauthorized. Okay, but let me go ahead and log in again. So let's go back here. Let's authorize. So it's loading, and there you go. So now we are authorized, which is good. Okay. So now anywhere in my application, if I want to, I can literally use the use context hook. So for example, in the dashboard page, I can go ahead and use the user context. Now, one thing I don't like about having this user parameter, this user property, be optional or be undefined or a user type, is because even if there is a user, the user context, its type is supposed to expect this to be undefined or user, which can be a little bit annoying. The only workaround that we can do is just use the exclamation mark to assert that we know that this is definitely not undefined. Because to be honest with you, if you think about it, right, if we reach this part of the application, we know for a fact that the user is definitely going to be defined. Because like I said, if the endpoint throws an error, if the endpoint returns a 403, it's going to throw an error, which means that this error is going to return unauthorized. Okay, so I think the best thing to do is just to use the exclamation mark to assert that we know that this is definitely defined and it's not undefined, if that makes sense. So now right over here, I can go ahead and do something like user.email, right? Now it's going to give me this red line saying object is possibly undefined, so I can just use the question mark, right? And you're going to see my email is going to appear on the dashboard. Okay, now if I go over here, I can go back to the main page again, and I can navigate back to the dashboard route. Okay, so that's pretty much it with authorization. All right, so regarding protecting our routes, because right now you can see that this logic over here will protect our routes, but the problem here is that they won't actually be able to access the landing page, which you definitely don't want. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to create a container, or not really a container, but I'm going to create, let's see, I'm going to do this. Authorized container.tsx. I'm going to try this out. I've never done this before, so this is going to be the first time trying it. So what this is going to do is just going to be authorized container. It's going to be a component, and it's essentially just going to return, I guess, a bunch of routes that should be rendered. Actually, I think I have a better idea. So what's going to happen is we're actually going to take all of this logic and we're going to move it into authorized container instead. So instead of doing that inside the app level, because that's going to do it at the very root level. And like I said, we still have we have some routes that don't actually need to be accessed. If for authenticated users, they can be accessed by anyone, even if you're not authenticated. Okay, so this is a good way to separate your guest pages between your authorized pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move everything into this authorized container, And I'm going to go ahead and return. So let's see. So what I do want is I definitely want to get rid of this user context provider because we don't need that here. I definitely still want these guest routes to be rendered no matter what. But what I want to do is I want to take all this stuff and I want to move this over here. So we'll take that there and we'll move this here. So hopefully this works. I've never tried it before, so I'm willing to try this out and hope that this works. Okay. So now what's next is we need to render this authorized user. Now before we do that, let me actually also import the user context over here. So instead of using that fragment, we'll use user context provider. And for the value, we'll pass in the user right there. Okay. Now we need to render authorized container. So let's try that out. So let's see what happens if I do that. So authorized container has its own switch. So let me see authorized container. Hopefully this works. Hopefully there's no issue. Okay, so if I go to here, okay, great. So actually it seems like this does work, I think. Let's just test. All right, so it seems like if I actually visit the guest route, right, you can see that I can actually still see the landing page or the login button. That's our landing page. If I try to go to dashboard, it's going to give me an unauthorized. We should also make it so that it redirects if the user is unauthorized. So what we can do is if an error happens, we can actually use the redirect. We can use this redirect component that's from React Router. And we just say, hey, look, redirect to /. Okay, so you can see that if I go to /dashboard, it'll literally redirect to login. Pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it with that. So now I cannot access any of the authorized routes, so I cannot access /dashboard/payments, and that's because this if condition over here, this if error, is protecting all of my other routes. Okay, but it's not affecting these other routes, this /services, this / it's not affecting any of those routes at all. So for example, I can create a bunch of routes. Let's say, for example, you might have a route that says something like, services, or let's say you might have another route that displays, anything that's public, really, like, let's say reviews, right? Reviews. Let's go ahead and visit that reviews page. So this will be unprotected. It's a guest page. Anyone can access it even if they're not logged in. Okay? But no matter what, I cannot access any of these logged in, these authorized routes. So let's go ahead and log in again. So let's log in. And let's click on authorize. So we should be able to go on the dashboard page. Good. If I try to go to dashboard/payments, that should work. Good. And I can see the nav bar, which is good. Now, if I go to the guest page, you can see I can still access the guest pages just fine. And that has no effect on whether or not I'm logged in or not. Okay, and it shouldn't have any effect at all. So there we go. So that's how we can protect our routes in a nice, clean way. Obviously, this is a very simple structure when it comes to routes. There's probably more complicated logic that you might need if you have more complicated route structures, but this should be good enough. It should be pretty scalable. I like it. Okay. So now that we have successfully connected the front end with the back end, we've successfully authorized or protected our pages for authorized users. What's next? So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and submit the payment on the front end. And when that happens, remember what we did was we created a payment intent on the back end. We sent the client secret to the front end, or the front end fetched the client secret. Okay. The front end basically fetched that API call. It called that /payment intent /create, and that's what gave us back a new payment intent with the client secret. And what we did was we used that client secret to finalize the payment. The last thing that we need to do after that is we need to make another API call to our API, not Stripe, our API from the front end. So let me show you that real quick. So we need to make an API call from our front end to our back end, to our own back end, and we need to update the status, indicating that the user has successfully made a payment. So let me just go ahead and go through the payment form real quick, the onSubmit function, okay? So if there's no Stripe, if there's no elements, if either one of these are falsy, okay, it's going to throw an error saying that Stripe is not loaded. If the card element was not found, it's going to throw an error, okay? So what happens is when the button is clicked and if all of these checks pass, if everything is, or if all these checks are falsy, it's going to go to this try catch. We're going to call create payment intent. That's going to call our backend API. It's going to create the payment intent on Stripe, and it's going to return that object to us. We care about the client secret only. We use the client secret to finalize the payment. Okay, we call stripe.confirm card payment. This is an API call made to Stripe directly, not our API, made to Stripe, and it sends the client secret along with the card details to Stripe. Okay, we finalize the payment, and what it does is it returns a payment intent. When that payment intent is returned, it will give us, well, what happens is it will actually return an error as well as a payment intent. Okay, and we destructured it over here. If there are any errors, such as if the card payment fails, it will tell us, and we need to handle that. If there are no errors, then it won't throw any error. Then we can just easily call our API, our own API, and update the user's status. We can update the premium status from false to true, which means that they have made a successful payment. Okay? And because we have authentication now, we know which Discord user is making the payment because we have their Discord ID. We also have the user's email address, which we can use to store on Stripe or even in our database, which we are. We can store the email on Stripe, and that way we can keep track of who's paying, okay? But essentially, the only thing that, like I said, the only thing we really need to worry about is just updating the status of the user based on their email address or their Discord ID, whatever you want to use. Doesn't really matter. So what we're gonna have to do is, well, let's do this first. Let's do this first. Let's go ahead and let's go back to our front-end application real quick. Okay, and let's go ahead and provide a card number, and let's click on pay. Seems like it's throwing an error right now. Let's see what's going on. Actually, no. I just don't have any indicator that it's loading. Okay, there we go. It's fine. It's working fine. So the payment is going through. You can see that the payment succeeded. Okay, we need to call our API. Okay, we need to call our API, and we need to update the user status. As you can see right over here, right now it's 7:35 a.m. It's showing Eastern Standard Time for some reason. I think it's because I have a different time zone on this account, on this Stripe account. But yeah, you can see that we have the payments going through. Okay, now does it have any information about the customer? No, it does not. But we can definitely send that information if we provide, let's see, I think, let's see, receipt email. Or there should be something about email address. Seems like, I don't know if there is, or if we can add that. I'm not sure, but it's okay. Because, like I said, we can always just save this. Let's see. We can always just save this stuff on the back end. It's not really a big deal. A better thing that I would also recommend that you guys can do, and if you guys want to do this, you can, is what you could do is when the user creates a new account, you can create a Stripe profile, or not Stripe profile, a Stripe customer, right? So Stripe customer is pretty much this entity over here. So you can go over here, click on add customer. So let's say, you know, my name, let's just say Avalon, Arizona, and then, you know, Avalon at Outlook, blah, blah, blah.com. And you can add whatever it is that you need. So what happens is whenever the user creates an account, it will create a customer, okay? And so that way you have a record of the user on Stripe too. So it should be able to keep track of all of their transactions. But like I said, it depends on how you want to scale this application, because right now we only have one product, but what if we have multiple products, right? What if you have multiple products that the user could possibly purchase? You definitely want to make sure you're creating a customer profile, which we will do that in future videos, but for now, we'll make it as simple as possible. But let's go ahead and do the final thing where we update the status. So let's go to the API, the Nest.js app. Let's go over to, let's see, seems like we want to update the user status. So you know what I'll do, since we are already going to need to create a new module for our Nest.js app. So what I'll do is this. Let me go ahead and do Nest.g module user. Yeah. Because like I said, I don't want to, I want to make sure that each module has its own, you know, set of functions, its own set of controllers. Actually, I did it in the wrong directory again. Sorry about that. I did it in the root learn directory. I need to go into the API and do that again. There we go. Okay, so that should create a user module for us. Okay, and for the user module, we'll create its own controller. So that will go inside users, controllers, user, and then we'll do a service as well. So let's do that real quick. And the user service will basically have its own methods. Let me close this out. So it'll have its own methods. So right now, one method that we'll have is update status or update premium or update user, whatever you want to call it, right? But for now, let's focus on the controller first. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create I guess this would be a put. Yeah, it'll be a put. So this will be user premium status. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll just simply say async update premium status. Okay. And we're gonna have to send, I guess we can send a request body to this endpoint, indicating the status. Okay. Or we can just make it so that whenever it calls this endpoint, it'll just update the status. Depends on how you want to handle it, but I think what we'll do is we'll just honestly just call the repository and just update it to true whenever we invoke this endpoint. Because really, this is actually, you know what? I think this is fine. Update premium status. Okay, so what I'm thinking is for this endpoint, what we'll do is we'll have this endpoint take in a request body, and the request body will have a Boolean value. Okay. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that whenever they pay, we're going to update the status we're going to update the premium status to true. If there's some refund, we'll set it to false. Okay. So, because yeah, you can also do refunds too. So what I'm thinking is let's go ahead and create the service now. So let me go ahead and create the interface for the service. Export interface user service. Whoops. So we need to create a function called update. I'll actually call it update status. Okay. And it's going to take in a parameter called status, which is going to be a Boolean. And I don't know what it'll return for now. I don't think it'll return anything. Okay, so let's implement the user service. And I'll implement that. So status is a Boolean. So now this user service is going to need to take in the, it's going to need to inject the user repository. So we do that by using the inject repository method or decorator, which we're gonna have to import manually because my IntelliSense is messed up right now. So user repository, and then repository user, just like that. So let me go ahead and import that real quick. So we want to import inject repository from this.js type rm, and we want to import from type rm there we go. Okay, and we're gonna basically call, oh wait, actually actually yeah, this is fine. I got confused. I thought this was the controller for a second. Yeah, we're in the service layer, so that's good. So we're gonna call user repository or dis.user repository.update, and we're gonna just update premium to whatever status is. Actually, should I just call this premium instead? Update. Let's see what's going on over here. Okay, so wait 1 second. We need two parameters. We need the we're gonna take the Discord ID and we're gonna take the Discord ID instead. Not instead. Sorry. We need two parameters. We need to provide a condition on to know who to update for, and then what to update with, or what to actually update. So we need the Discord ID as well. And like I said, you can use email if you want to, but you basically want to use something that's unique. But I'm just gonna go with Discord ID. So for update, we're going to want to pass in the Discord ID, and then we're going to update premium. So what I'll do is let me go ahead and update the parameters real quick. So Discord ID is going to be fine. Status, I'm going to change this to premium. All right, so we will change that real quick. So Discord D premium boolean. Okay, there you go. So that's the service. That's the service layer done. And because I confused this with the controller, I'm just gonna return this function call. In the controller level, we're gonna go ahead and first we need to inject that user service. So we're gonna have to do the same that we did earlier with our other services. We're gonna have to provide the token. Use class will be user service, just like that. Cool. So now we can inject that repository, or not repository, sorry, the dependency. So inject user service, and private read only user service, user service. Okay, and let's just make sure that everything is good. Just make sure there's no errors. So let's see. We also have to add the user repository, or add the user entity as well into this user module because we are using that. So let's import type ORM module for feature. Let's import user. So we're gonna have to import type ORM from Nest.js type ORM. Perfect. So that should get rid of that error. Good. Okay. So let's go ahead and inside the controller now, we're gonna go ahead and do a try catch. So try catch error. Okay. So if so, what we're gonna do is we're basically gonna go ahead and call user service.update status, but we need the Discord ID as well as the status, whatever the status is. And remember, we're going to send. We're going to send that from the front end to the back end. So the request body is only going to contain the it's going to contain the premium. It's going to contain the premium value. And I think, yeah, that'll definitely be in the request body. The Discord ID, we're going to get that from the authenticated user. Okay, so one thing that we should also do is we should also use the use guards decorator here. So that way it'll protect the entire controller. Okay, so instead of protecting an individual route, this will protect every single route inside the controller, which is good. Now, how do we actually get the actual user itself, right? How do we actually get the user object? Well, if you saw earlier, we actually got the user object from the request object, but is there a better way that we can do that? Because every single time we actually have to get the user object or get the user object from the request object, and that can be a little bit annoying sometimes. Is there a better way to do that? And the answer to that question is yes, there is actually a better way to do that, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So what you can do is you can actually create a custom decorator, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is inside utils types. Actually, should I do in types? I'll do this inside I'll actually create a file called decorators because we might have more later, but for now we'll have one. And what I'll do is I'll just call this auth user, and I'll call create param decorator. And this is going to take in a function with data unknown, and it's going to have the execution context similar to what you saw with the can activate inside. I think it was the let me go back. I think it was the guards earlier. It's similar to that. Okay. And what you're going to do is you're just going to basically get that request. So const request equals, you can go ahead and do, let's see, ctx switch to HTTP, get request, and then you can return request dot user. Okay, and this should, user, there we go. And this should give you the user. Okay, it should give you the actual authenticated user. Okay. So now if I go over here and if I use the auth user decorator, and if I type annotated to this, okay, it should give me the user and everything that I need. So let me go ahead, and before I do anything else, let me get rid of this. Let's just make sure this route works. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our front end. Let's refresh the page. Let's see. Actually, wait. We're not calling this yet. Okay, let's do this. Let's go over here. Let's try to call this endpoint. So it's /user/premium status, and it's supposed to be a put. And this should give us a 403. Good. Okay. If we were to call this from the front end, it should definitely work. So let's go ahead and let's see. So what I'm going to do on the front end now is we're going to go to that API.ts file that we created in the React app. So that's inside the React app, inside API.ts. And we're going to go ahead and do update premium status. Okay. And for this, it's going to be an access.put request. It's going to call the localhost /API/ let's see, it's going to be user premium status. And we're going to need some data. So for premium, this is going to be Boolean. And we're going to also need to make sure we pass in the credentials as well. I also forgot for this access.post, we should also pass in the credentials as well. Okay? Because we don't want people who are unauthenticated making requests to our API. That's not good. So what we're going to do is let me go ahead and just do a test call real quick. So on the payment form, I'm going to go ahead and just use a use effect hook real quick, just so I can test this API call, just to make sure that it works. Okay. Let's see, data here. And if there's any errors, we will log the error, and we need to pass in a Boolean. Okay, so if I go ahead and go into the logs now, let's see. So you can see that it seems like it's logging successfully. So if I go over here, you can see that. Let's see. Let's go back here. Let's refresh. So it doesn't return anything, but you can see that the logs are logging it. So you can see that we have the user. Okay, and that's how we can actually get the Discord ID. Okay, but now how do we actually get the data that is being sent from the front to the back end? So what we're going to do is, now let's just get rid of this real quick. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a DTO, which stands for data transfer object. And all that is just basically how you want to shape you can use it to shape the data that is being transferred from one source or one remote to another. Okay. That's what's called data transfer object. You can also say that it's basically what your request object or your payload is going to look like. Okay, but essentially that's what it's called, a DTO, data transfer object. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and just create a new folder called DTO, or not DTO, sorry. I think I'll create that inside utils. Okay. Actually, wait, sorry, not utils. Here's what I'm going to do. Each module is going to have its own utilities. And we'll just create a folder called DTOs. Or actually, you know what? No, I don't like that. I'm going to just create a folder called DTOs. Okay, and inside this DTO, I'll go ahead and do a premium status DTO.ts. Or you can call it premium status.dto.ts. .dto.ts. And the DTO is basically going to be a class, so I'll call this premium status DTO. And this is really what the request body is going to look like. The request body is only going to have one parameter, which is just going to be, or one property, which is going to be the status or premium. And this is just going to be a Boolean. Okay, now you can also use a package or class validator to validate your DTOs. So what you can do is you can actually ensure that this is actually going to, like the request body is going to have the premium property. If it doesn't, it'll throw an error. But we'll do that later. Okay, that's just, we don't want to do too much right now. So how do I actually use the DTO? So what we can do is we can use the body decorator. And we can say, hey, look, this body decorator is going to be of the type premium status DTO, premium status DTO, just like that. So now I can go ahead on the console log premium status DTO. And let's go back to the front end. Let me just undo this real quick. Let me make that API call again, and you'll see what is going to be sent to the API when I refresh the page. You're going to see that it gives us premium true. And if I go ahead and if I send false, it's going to give us false. Right there. Perfect. If I refresh, it's going to give us false. And that's exactly what we want to do. So if the API call succeeds, if the confirmed card payment succeeds, then we're going to send a premium status update of true. We're going to call update premium status and pass in true. And if it fails, then we're not going to really do anything, because, you know, if it fails, then the status should already be false already. Okay. Okay, so right over here, if there's no error, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call, let's see, update premium status, and we'll just pass in true. So this is going to call the API. Okay. And what we're going to do on the API is we're just going to search the database for that user. I'm going to update their status. Or actually, we already implemented that already. Sorry. So we don't have to actually do any searching. Remember, we have this user service to update status. Okay. And all we have to do is just pass in the parameters. So we can pass in user dot Discord ID, and we can pass in the premium status. And for this, I'm just going to destructure premium just like that. And I'll just destructure Discord ID, because I don't really need the other properties. So I'll just pass those in like that. Okay, so let's pay close attention. So if we go into the database, let's look at the data right now. So you can see that premium is currently 0, which is false. Okay. Now if there is an error, I think what I want to do is I do want to return a 400 status or 500 status, but we'll do that later. So okay, so let's try this out. So let's enter our card details, or test card details. Let's click on pay. Okay, so everything was good. Let's look at the logs real quick. So nothing failed. Let's look at the database. You can see that premium is now 1, so that indicates that we paid. If we were to go to the Stripe dashboard, if I refresh, if I click on payments, you're going to see that that payment went through just now, 7:57 a.m. Good. And there we go. So now all we really need to do on the front end is, remember what I said earlier in the first episode, was I said that if the user, if the premium status is false, then you're going to show that payment. If the premium status is true, which indicated that they did in fact pay, then you're going to show something else. Okay, so for example, let's go over to the dashboard again. So what we're going to do is we're going to reference this user object that we got from earlier. We're going to say, hey, look, let's do this. Let's do this. If user premium, so if that's true, then what we'll do is we'll say, hey, look, you have successfully paid for premium commands, or premium commands. And if user.premium is false, then we'll render the payment form. So watch what happens. If I refresh the page, you're going to see that it says you have successfully paid for premium commands. And obviously, you would render whatever it is that you want to render. Okay, this is just a simple example of conditional rendering. Okay, but that's not the most important part. The most important part is now to set up the Discord bot. So that way we can actually query the database, check to see if the user can actually use these commands based on their status, based on the premium status. Okay. So that's going to be pretty much it for this episode. Okay, so there will be another episode, and in the next episode, what I'll do is I'll show you guys how we can set up the Discord bot, and we can validate to make sure that the user is in fact a premium user, like they made a payment already, and they can use that command. So I'll show you guys how to do that. We are going to be using Slappy for the project. Okay. Other than that, I think that is going to be pretty much it. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in my next episode. Peace out.